What would you do if someone tried to take what was rightfully yours, simply because they believed they deserved it more? This is the story of one woman's quiet strength, an unexpected confrontation, and ultimate justice. End of Chapter 10. On what seemed like an ordinary flight, Ava Thompson, a successful black businesswoman, encountered entitlement and prejudice in the first-class cabin. Despite her calm demeanor and composure, she faced an audacious demand from another passenger to give up her seat. What followed was a powerful lesson in standing firm against discrimination and ensuring respect for oneself. This isn't just a story about a single moment. It's a story about resilience, karma, and the courage to hold your ground when others underestimate your worth. Ava's experience reminds us that justice can prevail when we refuse to back down. Justice marks an altering of civilization. Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to undermine you or witnessed an act of entitlement that left you stunned? Share your stories in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about respect and empowerment. Ava Thompson was no stranger to challenges. As a successful black businesswoman, she had spent years breaking through barriers that society placed in her path. With a calm demeanor and an unwavering sense of self-worth, she had risen above countless subtle and overt instances of bias. Her confidence and resilience were her armor, and today, like many other days, she carried them with quiet dignity. The first-class cabin reflected the height of luxury. The soft hum of the engines was accompanied by the scent of freshly brewed coffee and faint traces of expensive perfumes. Ava adjusted the light silk scarf around her neck, a small comfort during her travels, and reached for her polished leather briefcase. She had a long flight ahead, but her thoughts were focused on the strategies and plans she had meticulously noted in her sleek notebook. As she settled into her assigned seat, 3A, a woman approached with an air of authority. Claire Harris, dressed impeccably but with an unmistakable sense of entitlement, glanced at Ava with barely concealed irritation. "Excuse me," Claire said, her tone sharp. "I think there's been a mistake. This is my seat." Ava met her gaze calmly. Without a word, she handed over her boarding pass to the nearby flight attendant, who examined it carefully before confirming that Ava was indeed in her rightful seat. The tension in the cabin thickened as passengers, who had been pretending not to notice, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Claire's frustration deepened. "I've flown first class with this airline for years," she declared. "I don't think this is how loyal customers should be treated." Her words carried an unspoken accusation, as though Ava's presence in the seat somehow didn't align with her expectations. "Me too," said Ava. But Ava remained composed. She had faced this kind of entitlement before, and she wasn't about to let it rattle her. What Claire didn't realize was that Ava's quiet strength was more powerful than any loud demand. This moment was just the beginning of a lesson Claire and everyone watching would never forget. As the flight attendant examined the boarding pass Ava Thompson handed over, her calm demeanor was unwavering. Ava knew she was in the right seat, and she wasn't about to let anyone challenge her without cause. The attendant nodded politely and returned the pass to her. "Everything is in order, ma'am. This is your assigned seat," he said. Claire Harris, however, was not satisfied. Her carefully composed smile began to falter, replaced by a thinly veiled frustration. "There must be a mistake," Claire insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I always book seat 3A. I'm a premier elite member. I've flown with this airline for years." The flight attendant, visibly uncomfortable, tried to de-escalate the situation. "I understand, ma'am, but this seat has been assigned to Ms. Thompson. Perhaps I can check your boarding pass again to ensure?" "Don't bother," Claire snapped, cutting him off. Her gaze flickered back to Ava, who sat quietly in her seat, seemingly unbothered by the growing tension. Claire's sharp tone and increasingly agitated body language began to draw the attention of other passengers. Heads turned discreetly, and a few people glanced over their shoulder, pretending to adjust their screens or shift in their seats, though their curiosity was clear. The atmosphere in the cabin became thick with discomfort. The usual hum of polite silence that first-class passengers maintained had given way to an uneasy buzz. Some passengers exchanged whispered comments, their eyes darting between Ava and Claire. But Ava didn't flinch. She remained composed, her posture upright and her face calm. Years of working in high-stakes corporate boardrooms had prepared her for moments like this. Ava had faced situations where her authority, expertise, or even presence was questioned simply because of who she was. This wasn't new to her, and she wasn't about to let Claire's entitled behavior disrupt her peace. "Miss Harris," the flight attendant said cautiously, "if there's an issue, I'd be happy to assist, but Miss Thompson is in the correct seat. Perhaps we can take a moment to review your reservation details?" "No need," Claire interrupted again, her voice sharp. She gestured toward Ava with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake. This can't be her seat." The insinuation behind Claire's words hung heavily in the air. Ava felt the weight of the moment, but she refused to let it faze her. Instead, she spoke with a measured, steady tone. "If there's an issue with your reservation, I suggest you work with the airline staff to resolve it. I'm comfortable where I am." Claire's lips tightened at Ava's calm response. The control in Ava's voice seemed to frustrate her even more, as though she had expected a different reaction, perhaps one of submission or apology. Instead, Ava's composure only highlighted Claire's increasingly erratic behavior. Passengers who had been avoiding eye contact began to glance more openly at the unfolding scene. The silent tension in the cabin was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. "Look," Claire said, turning back to the flight attendant, her tone now laced with exasperation. "I'm a loyal customer. I fly first class all the time. I shouldn't have to deal with this." The attendant hesitated, clearly torn between appeasing Claire and upholding the fairness of the seating arrangement. Ava, meanwhile, shifted her focus back to her notebook, flipping a page as though the disruption was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance. Her deliberate movements carried an air of authority, silently communicating that she wasn't going anywhere. For Ava, this wasn't just about a seat. It was about standing firm against entitlement. She had learned long ago that maintaining her composure in moments like these was a way of asserting her presence without stooping to unnecessary confrontation. She wasn't about to let someone else's assumptions dictate her actions. Steve and Billy both stood up and made their way out, and as they did, she turned to Billy and Tamarin and held out her hand. Claire, however, wasn't ready to back down. "This is unacceptable," she declared, loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "I want to speak to the supervisor." The flight attendant nodded, relief evident on his face as he excused himself to fetch the supervisor. The pause in the exchange gave passengers a chance to exhale, though the tension remained thick in the air. Ava sat silently, her attention momentarily returning to her notebook, as though the disruption wasn't worth more than a passing thought. But she knew this wasn't over. The entitled rarely surrendered without a fight, and Ava was prepared to see it through, no matter how long it took. For her, this moment was about more than just her seat. It was about respect, fairness, and standing her ground in the face of bias. As Claire folded her arms and huffed impatiently, waiting for the supervisor's arrival, Ava remained unshaken. She knew that the next move wasn't hers to make. The gears of justice were already turning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The flight attendant returned moments later, accompanied by Lisa Harper, the flight supervisor. Lisa's calm but authoritative presence was meant to ease the growing tension. She had dealt with her share of difficult passengers, but something about this situation felt different. "Good evening, ladies," Lisa began, her tone measured as she glanced between Ava Thompson, seated with quiet composure, and Claire Harris, who was standing with her arms crossed and an expression of growing impatience. "I understand there's been a concern about seating." "Yes, there has," Claire said sharply, gesturing toward Ava. "This seat 3A is supposed to be mine. I've been a premier elite member with this airline for years, and I've never been treated like this before." Lisa turned to Ava with a polite smile. "Ms. Thompson, may I confirm your boarding pass once more?" Without hesitation, Ava handed it over. Lisa reviewed it carefully, nodded, and returned it. Miss Thompson is in the correct seat, she said firmly, turning back to Claire. There appears to be no error with the seating arrangement. Before Claire could respond, another passenger, Vanessa Hale, stepped into the fray. Dressed in sharp business attire and exuding an air of entitlement, Vanessa addressed Lisa with a clipped tone. "Excuse me, but I overheard the situation, and I have to agree with Claire. I find it strange that someone like her," Vanessa glanced pointedly at Ava, "would be sitting in first class. There must be some mistake." The implication in Vanessa's words was clear, and the tension in the cabin deepened. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some visibly uncomfortable with how the situation was unfolding. Ava finally looked up, locking eyes with Vanessa. Her voice was calm, but her words carried unmistakable weight. "Your status doesn't entitle you to what's mine," she said evenly. "Respect is not optional." The power in Ava's statement silenced the cabin. Vanessa blinked, momentarily thrown off by the quiet authority in Ava's tone. Claire, meanwhile, opened her mouth to argue further, but before she could speak, a deep voice interrupted. "Ladies," came the steady, commanding voice of the captain as he entered the cabin. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic, bringing a sense of authority that silenced even the most entitled complaints. Dressed impeccably in his uniform, he exuded professionalism and control. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the small group. Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding regarding the seating arrangement. Miss Thompson is in her assigned seat, but Miss Harris and Miss Hale have raised concerns." Miss Harris got up. The captain turned to Claire and Vanessa, his expression neutral but firm. "I understand your frustrations, but the seating assignment is clear. Miss Thompson is in the correct seat, and we need to move forward to ensure a timely departure." "But Claire started, only to be cut off by the captain's steady tone. "This is not up for debate," he said firmly. "Miss Thompson is staying in her seat. If there are further issues, you're welcome to discuss them with corporate after the flight." Vanessa's face flushed with anger, but the captain's presence left little room for argument. Claire, too, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Ava, meanwhile, simply returned to her notebook, her quiet focus a stark contrast to the flustered women before her. The captain gave Lisa a nod, signaling that the matter was resolved. "Let's proceed," he said, his tone leaving no room for dissent. As the captain exited the cabin, Vanessa and Claire exchanged frustrated glances. As the confrontation reached a boiling point, Ava Thompson remained calm, but her sharp mind was already strategizing her next move. She had dealt with enough corporate settings to know when words alone weren't enough. Quietly, she reached into the inner pocket of her blazer, pulled out her phone, and dialed a familiar number. "Marcus," she said, her tone professional but edged with controlled frustration. Marcus was a senior executive in corporate affairs at the airline and a trusted ally. I sat at the table and nodded. "This is Ava Thompson. I'm currently on flight 321 to Oslo, and I'm encountering a problem with your staff. I need this resolved immediately." Her composed demeanor as she spoke into the phone contrasted sharply with the chaos still brewing around her. Vanessa Hale, emboldened by her entitlement, noticed the call and scoffed loudly. "Oh, calling someone, are we?" she sneered. "Let me tell you something. You're not the only one with connections." Ignoring Vanessa, Ava continued her conversation. "Yes, I'm in seat 3A, and it's being disputed. I've already provided my boarding pass, but there's been an unnecessary escalation. This isn't just about me, Marcus. It's about the principal. I want accountability, not just for me, but for anyone else who's been treated like this." Passengers around the cabin exchanged glances, their curiosity and unease growing. Some even leaned slightly closer, trying to catch snippets of the escalating drama. As Ava ended her call, the wheels of corporate accountability began turning swiftly. Within minutes, her actions set off a chain reaction. A follow-up call from Marcus to the airline's operations team triggered an immediate review of the situation. The captain, who had already intervened, received a notification that senior corporate representatives were now involved, and swift action was required. 7 minutes later, they had a plan. Meanwhile, in the galley, Flight Attendant Tom and Supervisor Lisa Harper were discussing how to handle the situation. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp buzz from the cabin intercom. Lisa's face tightened as she glanced at her phone, noting a corporate message requesting an urgent review of her actions. "Corporate is involved," she muttered to Tom. His confident facade began to crack as he shifted nervously. "This is bigger than a simple seating issue now," Lisa added. Back in the cabin, Vanessa's frustration reached its peak. Her voice rose, loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, jabbing a finger toward Ava. "I've spent tens of thousands of dollars with this airline, and now I'm being disrespected because of her?" Her companion, Claire Harris, shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting her involvement. Vanessa, however, wasn't finished. "You think you can just sit there and act like you're better than me?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. Ava finally looked up from her notebook, her expression calm but resolute. "This isn't about being better than anyone," she said, her voice steady. "This is about respect. And it's about the way you think the world owes you something simply because of who you are." Then she sat back down to read her notes again. Vanessa opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, 2 men in corporate uniforms entered the cabin. One of them, holding an ID badge prominently displayed on his chest, approached Vanessa and Claire. "Mrs. Hale, Miss Harris," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. "We need to speak with you both privately." Vanessa's face flushed with anger. "I'm not going anywhere," she exclaimed. "You don't get to treat me like this. I'll be filing a complaint, and trust me, my lawyers will hear about this." The corporate representative didn't flinch. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Hale," he said. "But your conduct has made it impossible for us to ensure a safe and comfortable environment for all passengers. I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft." Vanessa's anger boiled over. "This is outrageous," she screamed. "Do you even know who I am?" The representative's expression remained neutral. "Your loyalty status has been noted, Mrs. Hale, but it does not exempt you from adhering to airline policies or respecting other passengers. Security is waiting to escort you off the plane." As Vanessa and Claire were escorted out of the cabin, the tension began to dissipate. The quiet buzz of conversation returned as passengers settled back into their seats, though many continued to glance at Ava with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Lisa and Tom exchanged uneasy looks as the corporate representatives returned to the galley for a private discussion. The gravity of the situation was clear. This was no longer a simple passenger dispute. Corporate accountability had arrived, and both Lisa and Tom now faced the possibility of serious consequences for their mishandling of the situation. Ava, meanwhile, resumed her work. She flipped a page in her notebook, her focus already shifting to the tasks ahead. The faint smile on her lips hinted at a quiet satisfaction, not from seeing Vanessa's outrage, but from knowing that justice had been served. For Ava, this wasn't just about a personal victory. It was about setting a precedent, about reminding the world that respect is a requirement, not an option. The message was clear: entitlement has no place where fairness and accountability reign. As the plane finally prepared for departure, the fallout from the incident began to unfold. Vanessa Hale, still fuming with indignation, had been escorted off the flight, her threats of legal action falling on deaf ears. Alongside her, Flight Supervisor Lisa Harper and Attendant Tom Davis were informed by corporate representatives that their conduct would be subject to an internal investigation. Both looked visibly shaken as they realized the gravity of the situation. Corporate's swift action was clear. Disciplinary measures would be taken to address the failure to handle the incident appropriately. It wasn't just about one mistake. It was about accountability. The airline's reputation was at stake, and the mishandling of such an incident could not be ignored. For Ava Thompson, this was never just about her seat on the plane. During her earlier phone call with Marcus, she had been clear about her expectations. This wasn't just about her personal experience, but about preventing similar incidents in the future. "I want more than an apology," she had told Marcus. "I want systemic changes. Staff training needs to improve, and there needs to be accountability for how passengers are treated, especially those who are often underestimated or overlooked. Ava's demands resonated with corporate leadership. By the time the flight was underway, she had already received confirmation that a full review of the airline's training protocols and policies would be conducted. New measures would ensure that respect and fairness were upheld for all passengers, regardless of their background or perceived status. This incident was more than a single act of discrimination or entitlement. For the passengers who witnessed it and the broader audience who would hear about it, it served as a powerful reminder of the importance of respect and accountability. Ava's quiet strength and refusal to back down sent a message that resonated far beyond the confines of the first-class cabin. It was a statement about the necessity of standing up for one's rights in the face of entitlement and bias. Passengers on the flight, many of whom had initially tried to avoid the confrontation, now reflected on what they had witnessed. Some approached Ava after the incident, offering quiet words of support. One woman, seated a few rows back, whispered, "Thank you for standing up. It was inspiring to watch." For Ava, the impact went even deeper. She knew this moment wasn't just about her, it was about creating a ripple effect. By refusing to let entitlement go unchecked, she had set a precedent for how such situations should be handled. The airline's leadership, recognizing the importance of the incident, released an internal memo highlighting the need for respect and inclusivity in all customer interactions. Ava's actions had forced them to confront a systemic issue, and they were now committed to making lasting changes. Meanwhile, Vanessa's outburst and entitled behavior had cost her more than just a seat. It was a lesson in humility, one she wasn't likely to forget. Lisa and Tom, too, faced the consequences of their actions, serving as a reminder that professionalism and fairness were non-negotiable in their roles. As the plane soared into the night sky, Ava leaned back in her seat, her thoughts shifting to the work ahead. This incident was a victory, but it was also a reminder of the work that remained. For Ava, true justice wasn't just about a single act of accountability. It was about creating a system where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Her quiet resolve and determination left an indelible mark on those who witnessed the events that day. It was a story of resilience, a lesson in humility, and a powerful reminder that respect is a requirement, not an option. This story reminds us all that respect isn't optional, it's a necessity. When it's disregarded, the consequences can be far-reaching, not just for individuals, but for entire systems. Ava Thompson's calm strength and determination turned a moment of entitlement into a powerful statement about accountability and justice. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where standing up for yourself or someone else made a difference? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation about respect, dignity, and the courage to challenge what's wrong. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who believe in the power of standing up for what's right. Together we can spread awareness and inspire change, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.